Hey everybody, Doc Edwards coming back to you for One Belly Wednesday. In this One Belly Wednesday, we're going to be talking about babies who have gone through medicated births. Sometimes that's important in order to help a birth progress. Things like epidurals can be very useful. Sometimes a birth ends up in a belly birth, a surgical birth, a cesarean delivery, and how do we need to be able to take care of those babies afterwards? It's one of the things that a lot of doctors don't tell moms or parents afterwards about what to do with the babies. And I want to help clear that up for some people. So we had a baby who came into the office. She's actually a foster baby. And the mother brought the baby in because she was inconsolable. It was one of the most touching stories I've ever had in practice, where you can imagine deciding to open up your family to a little girl whose parents had been abusing drugs, and to say, okay, well, I'm going to take this baby, I'm going to help her out. She was just absolutely terrified of everything. She was screaming and crying inconsolably, barely slept. The whole family was getting like an hour or so. The two little boys, who are her older brothers in this scenario, both were trying to do everything they could to help out too. But I mean, really, it got to the point where the family just felt like quitting and giving her back. And thankfully, one of her friends, a business partner of hers, said, listen, why don't you go get the baby checked? And when I was checking out this little girl, this little, I mean, she's just like, we're talking like a month and a half old, right? I held on to her and I was seeing she was so uncomfortable and extending her back and really trying to arch to open up space for her body. And it took me a couple of adjustments over a couple of days, but she's night and day different. The adjustments that we did for her were really releasing a lot of tension she held in around the protective tissue around her brain, down to her spinal cord, and adjusting babies is super gentle. The way that we like to say it is if you took a super ripe tomato or a mango and you pushed in before you go through the skin, that's how much pressure we use to adjust babies. There's so much cartilage, there's so much space, there's so much open area for things to move. You just have to know where to do it. And so she had been fine. Like for the first couple of weeks, this wasn't a really angry, upset baby at all. And so the question that the mom had was, well, what went wrong? What happened? So this is what happens during medicated deliveries. So usually what we'll see is for the first 10 to 12 days, the baby that you have in front of you is usually the blessing. If you've been through a 47-hour labor, like my son's mom had gone through, and you're just exhausted, you are super thankful that that baby is just resting a lot. It's sleeping well, you wake him up to feed, doesn't cause a whole lot of fuss. And then about 2 weeks later, you get the baby that went through that birth. That's when it really starts showing up. That they had been trying to get out of the birth canal, that they had been stuck or maybe even pulled back out after having gotten down into the birth canal, down into the pelvis, and need to get pulled back out in order to come back through the belly tissue. So there's a lot of things that will then happen. I mean, the subluxations, the interference between how their brains and body are talking, can happen where their skull meets their first couple of neck bones. It can happen because of a twist that's happening somewhere in the protective wrapper that wraps around the spinal cord and then attaches into the bone. They have these little tooth-like ligaments called dentate ligaments. And if vertebrae are getting twisted or pulled, then that can create torsion all the way through the spinal cord. The other thing that we see is that 40% of all babies, whether they're born through the birth canal or whether they're belly births, end up with some form of something we call a subdural hematoma. It's like a bruise that's underneath the tissue of that protective wrapper where the brain tissue is. And so what we wanted to be able to do with those babies is to be able to identify, first off, is that the case? So last One Belly Wednesday, we talked about some of the screening tools that we use to see if a brain is in fight or flight by using the eyes. And those are actually applicable not just to moms, but also to babies as well. So we'll use some of those testing tools to figure out, okay, are the areas of the brain that we're concerned about functioning or not? And if they're not functioning really well, then what we need to do is help out. The way that we like to help out is usually 3 different ways. Way number 1 is, again, I'm a chiropractor, so I adjust babies. And so being able to adjust them is a really safe, gentle way to help make sure that the cerebral spinal fluid, that fluid that bathes the brain and helps give it nutrients, is circulating properly around the brain and the spinal cord. Now, this fluid doesn't have a pump. It doesn't have a pump like your heart will pump your blood. It relies on your breathing. It relies on babies' sucking reflexes. It relies even on them crying to circulate that fluid around the brain and back down the spinal cord again. So that's the first thing, is making sure that area is clear. The second thing that I do is to make sure that that baby is able to have a good measurement between the forehead and the back of the head here. So what we do is we measure, when babies are born around their entire head circumference. But I look one side and compare it to the other side. If we have a torsion in there, or if what we will have what's called jet syndrome. So a jaw is not opening well or off to the side. The eye is a little smaller on one side than the other side. So that's kind of like a pirate eye, like that. Or if the head is twisted or turned, has a preference for going to one direction, we know that there's torsion going on someplace up there in the head. The activities that we'll do then is, again, super gentle. Being able to make sure that all those bones that are mostly cartilage at this point in time are flexing and extending and moving properly so the baby doesn't have a misshapen head. You'll see them. You're walking around the grocery store and you see some babies that have like a flat spot on there. Those are the kinds of babies that we help. The last thing that we'll do, if the adjusting and the cranial work are getting some slow progress but not enough, is that we'll start looking at what we need to do with some extra activity to stimulate that side of the brain. So we have some things where, let's say the problem's on the right-hand side of the baby's brain, we need to activate the left side of the baby's body so 85% of the information that comes from that side can cross over, feed that part of the brain, help stimulate the growth. So again, being able to be a highly trained perinatal chiropractor didn't just happen overnight. If you are looking for chiropractic care and people who are really drooly about this kind of stuff, about helping babies like this, they're going to be able to look at these babies and say, hey, listen, there was a problem here. They've got a fight or flight issue. We need to be able to help that so the baby can latch well, so the baby can sleep well, so they can go ahead and digest their food properly. A lot of those babies, if it's a surgical birth, end up having a bad gut on the inside, so baby probiotics are really helpful for that. And sometimes there's a food that mom's eating. We call them the big four: gluten, egg, dairy, or soy. That sometimes can also be just fermenting on the inside of the tummy and creating gas. And so all those are things that we try to work out and be really scientific about the why behind why those babies at first were sleeping little angels, but then become the, oh my goodness, what's wrong with my kid, that ends up bringing them into our office. One of the best gifts I can ever give parents is, once we get through that process after a couple of weeks, is giving them back their child that they had visualized, that they dreamed up during that pregnancy. So if you have parents that that have brought home babies and they're struggling a bit and they don't really know what to do, they don't know who to turn to, we're all in kind of a weird time right now. They're not sure, who they should bring their baby to. They don't, they bring the baby to the pediatrician. The pediatrician's like, oh, baby will grow out of it. It's not that big of a deal. Listen, it was a huge deal to that family. The ability to sit there with their child and be able to unlock with things that nobody else had really been able to do has literally saved that child from being able to have to go back into the foster care system and help that family help bond with that kid. It makes a huge difference. So don't be afraid to say, hey, listen, here's a video that I might want to show you. If you're having a hard time, we know that you're anxious, we know that you're not sleeping well, maybe get the baby checked by a chiropractor. Check out the ICPA. That is the International Chiropractic Pediatric Association. The chiropractors that are involved with the ICPA are super drooly about working with kids, super drooly working with babies, and they're highly trained and very skilled and can be absolutely capable to be able to take care of those kids. So until next time, I really look forward to seeing you again next week. I love doing these live. Sometimes we record them ahead of time and can kind of do some fancy stuff with graphics and things, but sometimes it's just fun to come to you and just talk straight into the camera and hope that you all are doing great. If you have questions or comments about things, always leave those down below. I love reading those. I love checking in and hearing about your stories too. So until then, take great care.